Hey everyone, today we're going to be adding ability to upload receipts to transactions because file handling is important for pretty much any web application. Now we could build the file system handling from scratch, which would take a long time, or we could use one of the very well maintained and great existing packages that support multiple storage systems, including cloud-based file storages like S3. The package that we're going to be using is called Flysystem, and it basically provides a single interface with its easy to use and consistent API to interact with different file systems. As you can see here, this package supports various adapters, local, SFTP, S3, Google Cloud, and so on. We're going to be using the local adapter for now, but setting up one of these other adapters should not be an issue. So let's click on local here, and the first thing that we'll need to do is that we'll need to compose or require this package. So let's copy this, open the terminal, paste this command in. Let's go back to the documentation, and we have two sections here. One is for simple usage and other is for advanced usage. We're going to stick with the simple usage for now, but you can see that within the advanced usage you could customize certain things. Now within this code snippet here, seems like we need to instantiate the adapter instance and then pass that object to the file system constructor. Now I don't want to instantiate the file system this way because I want to be able to inject the file system as a dependency in constructors. There are multiple ways that we could do that. One is by using a factory pattern, which would be responsible for creating the proper file system instance for us with the proper adapter. And another way is by adding an entry in our container bindings for the file system class, which is the simplest solution for our use case in my opinion, and that's what we're going to do. So we're going to still copy this code here, go to the code editor. We have container bindings PHP file open here. We're going to add a new entry here for file system, and we'll paste in the code in here. Now let's get rid of these comments, and we'll also just simply return a new file system instance this way. As far as the directory goes, we'll use the storage path constant that we already have, and that's where we're going to be storing our local files. So let's put this on one line, and this looks good. Now, while this looks good, I kind of want to make this part configurable so that we can create an adapter based on some configuration, so that in future it's easier to add support for more adapters like S3. So what I want to do is that instead of instantiating a local file system adapter here, I want this to be instantiated based on some config value. So let's inject our config class in here, and we'll open the app.config, and let's add a new section here for storage. And for now, we'll just have a single entry here called the driver, and we'll call this local. We could replace this with S3 in the future or with any other adapter. Now going back to the container bindings, instead of instantiating the adapter this way, we'll use a simple match expression here, and we'll do config get storage.driver, and if it's local, we'll simply instantiate this adapter. Later, if we add support for S3, we'll just add a new line here and add support for S3 and instantiate the S3 adapter, passing in all the necessary configuration values that we need and that we can get from the config file. For now, we only need the local, so let's get rid of that. And in fact, let's make this an enum class because I prefer not to hardcode these types of things. So instead of hardcoding this here, we'll do something like storage driver, and we'll do the same thing in our app config file, and we'll put it here. Let's create this enum. We'll put it within app enum. Let's change this to enum. This is going to have a single case for now called local, and we don't need to make this a backed enum because we don't really care for the string value local. So let's close that out. Let's also import this, and I think this looks good. Now if you notice that this section is becoming bloated, you could extract it to its own class, but for now this looks good. Alright, now that we have this set up, let's use it to upload the receipts to the transactions, because now we should be able to inject this in our receipt controller that are created behind the scenes, and I'm going to go over this with you in just a minute. So we'll add a constructor here, and we'll inject private read-only file system, and we should be able to use this to upload the file. So let's go over some of the changes that I did behind the scenes. If we go to the transactions page, you might notice this new button here that when clicked opens up a new model to upload the receipt. It allows us to choose a file. So if I click on that and I pick some file, and let's inspect element here and click upload, it basically makes post request to this new endpoint transactions ID receipts with a multi-part form data content type. Now the controller part doesn't actually do anything. It doesn't upload the file itself, so nothing really is being done. It just returns 200 OK response, which is why the model was closed. So if we go back to the code here and open upload receipt model, this is the model that is open when you click on the upload button. As you can see, it's a simple model. We just have a single input field here of type file and the name receipt. Then we open this model within the transactions.js here. We have a new variable here, upload receipt model, and then we have a new button here that actually opens that receipt model. We have the listener handling right here for that upload receipt button. It sets the transaction ID attribute on the upload receipt button within that model and opens the model. Then we have a click event listener on the upload button, which basically loops through all the files and appends it to the form data object. We are using form data object here because we are making a multi-part form data post request. Now, of course, you could have just made a form with enctype attribute set to multi-part form data, but we're doing uploads via AJAX call. I had to make another adjustment to our AJAX function to properly pass the CSRF and other post data along with the file when the data object is type of form data. So here we're checking if the data is instance of form data, and if it is, we're looping through the additional fields and appending them to the form data object. And the additional fields simply contain the CSRF fields and the method if it's a put, delete, or patch request. We remove the content type header here so that it uses the default one for multi-part request and does not overwrite. And then we set the data to the body property. Otherwise, we do whatever we were doing before if the data object is not an instance of form data. And that's about it. We do have a new route within the web routes file here. This is the new route right here, which invokes the store method on the receipt controller. Now you might be asking why I decided to create a new controller and not add the upload receipt method within the transaction controller. And the answer to that is because transaction controller seems to be becoming a little bit bloated, and I don't want to put everything in that controller. So if we go to that store method within the receipt controller, we see that this is how we access the file that is being uploaded, and then we have to fill this in to actually upload the file. We are using the get uploaded files method on the request object that comes with the Slim PHP framework, and this contains an array of uploaded file interface objects, and we just access the one that we need based on the name, and ours is called receipt. The returned object here, as I mentioned, is an object of uploaded file interface, which if we inspect is a PSR interface. Alright, so let's now actually upload the receipt file. We can use the write method on the file system to do that. So we'll do this file system write. We're going to put it under the receipts directory, so receipts, and we'll concatenate it with the file name. And let's create this file name variable here, and for now we're going to set it to the original file name of the file, and later we'll refactor this to use some sort of unique ID. The second argument that we need to pass is the contents of the file. We can get the contents from the uploaded file object by using get stream and then get contents. Now we could also write stream if we had a resource type, but we're going to write content in this case. If you were uploading like a large file, then using write and get contents may not be most efficient. So in that case, then you would upload using write stream. All right, so let's test this out now to see if it actually works. So I'm going to open the project here. Let's scroll down to the storage. And once we upload the file, we should see a new directory get created here called receipts with the file under it. So let's open the browser. Let's upload. Let's select the receipt, click upload. Let's check the storage, and sure enough, the receipts directory was created and we have the receipt.pdf file uploaded here. Great, so we verified that the upload works. Now, of course, we're not done yet. We still need to validate the uploaded file, right? We want to make sure that we have some sort of validation. So let's work on that next. We're going to need a new request validator class. So let's first inject the request validator interface in the constructor. So we'll do private read-only request validator factory interface. Let's format the code, and then we're going to do something like this: request validator factory make, and we'll pass in our custom validator class here. So maybe we'll create something like upload receipt request validator, and we'll call validate method on it, and we do need to pass the data. Now, instead of passing a specific file receipt here, we'll just pass all the uploaded files from the request, which is also an array. Let's format the code, and now let's create this class. We'll create this class within the request validators namespace, and this class needs to implement the request validator interface. Let's add that method definition, and we'll implement our custom validation in here. Now note that we're not going to be using Valitron for this validation, because Valitron doesn't have a built-in way to validate files. So we'll basically build some custom validations. First, let's extract the uploaded file from the data argument that is passed here. So we'll do uploaded file equals data receipt, and if it's not set for whatever reason, we'll set it to null by default. So again, from the controller, we're passing all the uploaded files here because it's an array, and then within our validator, we are extracting the receipt file. Now again, this is going to be an object of uploaded file interface, and we're going to return data. Now in here, we need to fill in our custom validations. Let's actually write down what we want to validate so that it's easier to implement. So first, of course, we want to make sure that the file was actually uploaded successfully to the temp directory. If you need a refresher on file uploads, check the video from the second section where we go over the file's superglobal. Slim PHP basically wraps that and implements the PSR interface so that we're not dealing with the file superglobal directly. Then we want to validate the maximum file size. So we need to validate the file size. We also want to validate the file name. And last but not least, we should validate the Mime type and extension to ensure that that file that is being uploaded is actually one of the allowed types. So first, we're going to check if the uploaded file is not null, because if the receipt is not given within the data variable here, that means that maybe file was not uploaded, or file was not selected, or maybe file was uploaded under a different input name. So we'll check if not uploaded file. We'll throw a new validation exception. We'll pass in an array. The receipt is our key, and for the error message, we'll say something like, please select a receipt file. Then we also want to validate that there has been no upload errors, right? So we can do that by using getError from the uploaded file object. So we'll do uploaded file getError. And if this doesn't equal to upload error okay, which means that the upload was successful, then we'll throw new validation exception again. And actually, let's copy and paste it here, and we'll change this around and say failed to upload the receipt file. If we inspect the getError message here, we see that it retrieves the error associated with the uploaded file. The return value must be one of PHP's upload error constants, and if the file was uploaded successfully, this method must return upload error okay. Implementations should return the value stored in the error key of the file in the file's superglobal array. So as you can see, most of these methods return data from the file's array. Now if we inspect this constant, we see that we could use different constants to check for different types of errors if you wanted to have more specific error messages. But for our use case, this should be good enough. And with that, I think we're done with the first validation step. Now let's move on to the next one, where we validate the file size. Please note that the server might also block large file uploads, but that should not be the only sort of validation that you can rely on. That's why we are adding an additional validation within the PHP code and not relying on the server settings. For example, if I open the nginx config file here, I added client max body size to 20 megabytes to allow file uploads of up to 20 megabytes, and also the local ini here, I've added the upload max file size to 20 megabytes and post max size to 20 megabytes. Without these settings, if you try to upload a file that is greater than the default file size that's set on the server's default configuration files, then it will result in errors. So that's why I've modified the nginx configuration and also the local PHP ini file to support a little bit larger file uploads. Now, just because we have this limitation globally, meaning that we allow file uploads of up to 20 megabytes across our application, we may want to limit specific file uploads. So in this case, we want to limit the receipt file. Now, to validate the file size, we need to define some sort of maximum file size, and we're going to allow files up to maybe 5 megabytes, because I don't think receipts would be anything bigger than that. We could of course adjust it based on needs in future, but for now 5 megabytes should be enough. We can use the getSize method on the uploaded file object to compare. So we can do if uploaded file getSize is greater than max file size, we'll throw the validation error. So let's copy this, paste it here, and we'll change the error message to something like maximum allowed size is 5 megabytes. Now note that the getSize returns size in bytes, and we have this in megabytes, so we need to convert this into bytes. We can do that easily by multiplying this by 1024 to convert it to kilobytes, and multiply it again by 1024 to convert it to bytes. And with that, we should be done with the second validation step. Let's move on to the third one, where we need to validate the file name. Let's store the file name in a variable, and we can get the file name by calling getClientFileName method. Now, as far as the validation goes, you can be as strict as you want. I personally like to be strict, and I either error out during the upload if the file name is invalid, or I sanitize the file name before saving it to storage. Since we're doing validation here, we can just throw a validation exception on invalid file name, but if that causes a UX problem, then you can simply sanitize it and remove some special characters from it. We can use a simple regular expression to check for alphanumeric string with some special characters allowed, like period, dash, and underscore. If the file validation fails, we'll again throw the validation exception here, and let's specify the error message here, invalid file name. Now, this part might be overkill here because we won't really be using the file name to store the physical file, but instead we'll be using generated unique IDs as file names. Next, we can move on to the part 4 here, where we need to validate the file type. And this is the fun part and the tricky one. We can get the MIME type sent by the client using getClientMediaType method. So we can do something like if not in array uploaded file getClientMediaType, and provide some kind of allowed MIME types array here. If the given client MIME type is not one of the allowed MIME types, we can throw an exception. So let's throw the exception here, and we'll say something like receipt has to be either an image or a PDF document, because I don't think we want to support any other types of receipts. For now, we can support just the receipt images or the PDF document. So let's create this variable here, and we'll set it to image JPEG, image PNG, and application PDF. Now, while this is a good option to check for MIME type, notice that it's checking the client MIME type, which means that since it's coming from the client side, it can be spoofed and changed. So we cannot really rely on this value entirely. It's a good check as like a first type of check to simply error out right away if the MIME type from the client doesn't match one of the available ones here. But we need some additional checks to ensure that the MIME type of the file is actually one of the allowed MIME types. In fact, if we inspect this method, we see that even the documentation states not to trust the value returned by this method. A client could send a malicious media type with the intention to corrupt or hack your application. So basically, the value of this is the type key from the files array, and we cannot rely on that entirely. Alright, so we can add two additional checks here, one to check the extension and the other to check the MIME type using PHP file info functions. If we open the PHP documentation, we see that the PHP file info functions try to guess the content type and encoding of the file. It should be installed by default, but for Windows you might need to enable the extension if you're not using Docker and are using something like XAMPP. So if you get errors related to file info not existing, try adding php_fileinfo.dll in the php ini configuration file. Alright, so we can either use the file info functions or we can use finfo objects and then call the methods on it. So let's go back to the code here, and we're going to use the finfo object. So we'll instantiate the new finfo object here, and we'll pass the flag in the constructor, which indicates the information that we need. These constants are in the documentation as well, so you can check them out, but for this check we need extension. Once we have this object, we can call the file method on it and pass the path to the file. So we'll do extension equals fileinfo file and pass the path to the file. So we need tmp file path here, and we can get the tmp file path from the uploaded file object. We also need to define allowed extensions the same way we defined allowed MIME types in here. So let's add allowed extensions here, and we'll have PDF, PNG, JPEG, and JPG. Then we can check if the given extension is part of the allowed extensions. If not, we'll throw a validation exception. So let's throw that. Let's change the message to something like receipt has to be either PDF, PNG, JPG, or JPEG. Now, if we inspect this file info extension constant here, we see that the documentation states that the 3 question marks will be returned for unknown types, which is good for our case because if the extension cannot be detected for whatever reason, then it will fail our validation because it's not one of the allowed extensions. We can add another validation to check the actual MIME type using the finfo object. So in fact, before I do that, I kind of want to move this part into its own method called getExtension so that we don't need to do all of this in here. So let's remove this from here, and instead of extension, we'll do this getExtension, and we'll pass the tmp file path in here. So we do still need the tmp file path, so let's move this up here and let's take these. So let's create this function here. Let's call this path and paste in this code, and we'll simply return this way. In fact, we can probably make this a one-liner here, so we'll do something like this, and that should be good. And the file method returns either string or false. So if it returns false, we can return an empty string. So let's add a type here that it returns string. So if for whatever reason this returns a falsy value, we'll return an empty string. So now that we have this method, we can duplicate it and call it getMimeType. And again, it's going to take in path as an argument, and actually let's change this to strings. It should not be mixed, so we'll change this to string. And instead of passing in file info extension, we'll pass in another constant here called file info MIME type. Then we can do the same check in here, so we'll do if not in array get MIME type within the allowed MIME types. We can throw a validation exception with the message something like invalid file type. And I think this should be good enough. Now, this is probably not bulletproof, but it's good enough for now. Another thing that I want you to note is that I would probably have some generic error messages in here instead of being too specific, because I don't like to give away too much technical information to the user. I would probably create some sort of generic error message and then log additional information as needed. But for now, I want to keep them different so that we can test each one of them in the browser. Alright, so now let's actually test this out to see if validation works. I've prepared some of the invalid file types ahead of time, so we're going to try each one of them out. So let's go to the browser. Let's try to upload the invalid file type. So I'm going to upload the invalid receipt document here, which is a PDF document. So let's upload that. Click upload, and we're getting invalid file name error, which I don't think is correct. Our file name is valid. Let's check here. Maybe my regular expression is wrong. Oh, because the file name contains the space and I'm not allowing space here. So let's add space. I think we should be good now. Let's try to do this again. Let's hit upload. And now we're getting receipt has to be either PDF, PNG, JPG, or JPEG. And even though our file has correct extension, the body of it or the content of it may be different. That's why we're getting this error. Because essentially the extension returned by the file info function is not the same extension as it is on the file. That's why it's good to use file info and not rely on the extension that comes with the file name. We could have validated the extension by extracting the extension from the file name, maybe by exploding on the dot and getting the last part of the array. But then again, that would not be the right way to validate it, because the client can change the extension the same way that I have done it for this file. Now let's test the large file upload here. So press that. We're getting maximum allowed size is 5 megabytes. Let's upload unsupported extension.csv file, and we're getting receipt has to be either an image or a PDF document. And this is the first check here that we have based on the client Mime type right here. So it doesn't even get to this section here to check for the actual extension, but instead we're able to catch that early on using the client Mime type, because the file that is given is neither of these allowed Mime types. It's a CSV file. Now I'm going to comment out this section here because this seems to be catching all the errors related to even the Mime type difference. So I'm just going to comment this out to simulate somehow where this passes and the file still has the wrong Mime type, to sort of test this section right here. So let's go back to the browser. Let's select the invalid receipt image type here, which is a JPG file, which is supported by our application, but it is a file that I simply renamed, which was a text document beforehand. So if I click on that, we see that we're getting invalid file type error, which is coming from this. If I uncomment this and I submit this, we're getting the extension related error. Now let's refresh the page and try to upload nothing. So if I don't select any file and click upload, we're getting please select a receipt file, which is this section right here. The Flysystem has a built-in way to check for Mime types. If we open the Flysystem documentation and search for Mime here, we see that they have Mime type detection section. If we click on that, we can install this composer dependency, and then we can detect the Mime type based on the file path and based on the content. So let's take this and paste it in our terminal. Next, let's create the file info Mime type detector object. So we'll copy this and we'll paste it somewhere here. Let's import this class, and then we'll do detector detect Mime type. We need to pass in the file path here, and as the second argument we can pass in the contents, which will basically try to detect the Mime type from the contents, and it will fall back to the extension if it cannot detect the Mime type based on the content. So we can get the file content by again using uploaded file get stream get contents, and we'll set this to Mime type here, and let's replace this with Mime type. And actually, let's move this detector part on the bottom here after this first part check, because if this detects it on the client side, that's good, then we don't need to do any additional checks. But if it doesn't, then we'll do additional checks here. And we can actually get rid of this, and we can drop these custom methods here. Let's format the code, and this should be good enough. Let's replace the error message with something like invalid file type. Let's go to browser. Let's try to test this out. Let's upload the invalid receipt image here. We click upload, we get invalid file type. Let's upload invalid PDF here. We get the same invalid file type error. Let's upload large file. That still works. Let's upload unsupported extension, and that works from the client side detection. And I think we're good to go. If I select a valid receipt PDF and click upload, I think we may have a bug here. Let's go back. Yeah, so we're doing allowed extensions check instead of allowed MIME types. So I need to replace this with this and get rid of that. That's a funny little bug. We need to retest this whole thing. So let's try it again. We're going to upload invalid PDF. That works. Let's try to upload unsupported extension. That works. Let's try invalid image. That works. Let's try large file. That works. And now let's try the valid PDF. And now it works. So as you can see, we learned how to do the proper validation without using the package, and then how to do the validation using the Flysystem package. As you can see, it has multiple methods here that you can use, from buffer, from file, and so on. But anyways, now you know how to do it both ways. Alright, so I think now we should be good with our validation. We can actually close this down and we can go back to the controller, and let's now create the receipt entity record, and also let's generate the proper file name, because storing the original file name is not recommended for various reasons. One of them being that it can conflict and overwrite files with the same names. So the first thing that we need to do is that we actually need to get the transaction entity from the transaction ID that we get as part of the route argument. We can actually do something similar to what we did in our transaction controller. If we scroll down here within the update method, we're getting the transaction this way, and if the transaction entity doesn't exist, then we respond with a 404. So we can actually copy this and paste it here to do the same thing. Let's replace this with args, and this should be good. Now that we have the transaction entity, we can pass that as an argument to a method to create the receipt entity. We can create something like a receipt service to create the receipt entity. So we can do something like this: receipt service create, and pass the transaction as an argument, and also pass the file name as another argument, and this is the client original file name. Let's inject the receipt service here. So we'll do private read-only receipt service. We'll need to create this service class. We'll put it within the services namespace, and this is going to have the create method. So let's add that, and it's going to return a receipt entity. Then we need to create the new receipt entity in here. Let's set the transaction this way. We also need to set the file name this way, and actually let's be consistent and keep these lowercase here, and also within here let's do it this way, and let's continue. Next we need to set the created at to new date time, and I think that's it. We don't have any more setters. Yeah, and then we need to persist and flush the entity manager. So we need to inject the entity manager here. So we'll do private read-only entity manager, and this entity manager persist receipt, and this entity manager flush, and return receipt. Alright, so now that we have the receipt service, we need to figure out how to generate the file name. In fact, let's move this down after the file upload here. So first we'll upload the file, and then we'll create the record in the database. Now, as far as the file name goes, some like to use UUIDs, and some prefer to use hashes, and some have other strategies of generating unique IDs. We could also use a randomizer class, which was introduced in PHP 8.2, but we haven't upgraded to PHP 8.2 yet, which we'll do soon. I first want to write some more code so that when we upgrade, we can follow the upgrade guide together to show you the usual process of upgrading versions. So instead, we're going to use a function called random bytes, which will generate cryptographically secure pseudo-random bytes for the given length. So we can do something like random file name equals random bytes, and then we'll need to use bin to hex function to convert binary to hex. Then we can use this random file name to upload the file. So we'll actually move this right here, and let's pass this instead of the file name there, and that should be good. Let's test this out now. Actually, before we test this out, we're getting a highlighting here. Oh, I think we didn't inject the transaction service. So let's do private read-only transaction service, and this should be good enough. Now let's open the project file here, and let's keep an eye on the storage receipts directory so that we can see the new file. Let's go back to the browser. Let's try to upload here. Let's select receipt, click upload. Let's go back here, and it did not work. Are we getting 500 error here? Let's inspect element, click upload. Yeah, we're getting 500. We don't see anything in response. This would probably go in the logs, but if you want to see it in the browser when you inspect element, I'll show you a trick that you can do that. So you can go to the Ajax call that we're making and simply parse the response to JSON or to text or something like that. So we'll do response JSON. Let's go back. Let's try to upload the file now, and we're getting 500, and now we can see the actual error. So the error states that call to a member function get file name on array receipt controller line 32. So let's go back to the receipt controller. Line 32 is this. Oh yeah, that's right, because this is returning an array and we need to get the actual file by accessing the receipt, and I think this should work. Let's click upload now, and seems like that worked. We're getting 200. Let's check the storage, and sure enough, we see the new file that was uploaded with a random name. Notice that it has no extension, which is fine. We can add the extension when we're downloading the file or whenever we're loading it. If we are gonna need the extension on the files later, maybe we'll circle back and we'll add it, but for now I don't think we need to add the extension to the actual files that are stored in the storage. Let's also check the database here, and we see that the receipt record was created. Now there is an issue here actually, because we're storing the original file name, but we're not storing the actual name of the physical file that was uploaded in the storage. So we have no way of loading it or downloading it later on. So in addition to storing the original file name here, which we can use for display, we also need to store this random file name that was generated. You can also store some additional information if you want to, like MIME type, extension, file size, and so on, but I don't think we'll need those. If we do, we'll add them later on. Now to add additional columns, we have to modify the entity and then run the diff command to generate the proper migration. So let's open the receipt entity, and in addition to file name, then maybe we'll add another property here called something like storage file name. So we'll do storage file name. In fact, why don't we change this file underscore name to just file name without the underscore, so that we are consistent with not capitalizing the N and keeping the file name as one word. Let's generate the getter and setters here for the storage file name. This will return receipt, and we'll return this here. And also let's adjust the getter and setter for the file name, because this will be file name, and this will be file name, file name, file name, and let's change this to file name this way and this way. I don't think we use this anywhere, and we use this in one place here, so we'll change this here, and we'll also set the storage file name, and we'll need to pass the storage file name as another argument here. So we'll do string storage file name, and I don't know why this is nullable. This should not be. I think this was auto-generated. Let's go back here, and we'll pass the random file name here. Alright, so now for this actually to work, we need to generate the migration and run it to update the database schema. So let's open the terminal and run PHP xpennies diff. This generated a migration. Let's open the migration and review the SQL that it has generated. So it's altering the receipts table, it's adding the storage file name, and it's also changing the file underscore name to file name, which is correct. And for the down method, it's also altering the receipts table, it's adding file underscore name. So no, it should not be adding, this should be changing file name to file underscore name. And then it should be dropping the storage file name, so we can get rid of that. That's why it's always good to inspect the auto-generated migrations and adjust them to our needs. All right, let's migrate. So we'll do PHP xpennies migrate. Let's inspect the database. And seems like that worked. It renamed the file name to this, and it added storage file name at the end. Let's actually fix that and add the storage file name after the file name. So we'll revert the migration by doing xpanis migrate prev. This rolled back that migration. If we refresh, we're back to file_name. Let's adjust this migration now, and we'll say to add this after file_name. Let's run the migrations now. It says unknown column file_name. Maybe this has to be file name because we're changing it right here. Let's try it again. And that worked. Let's refresh the table here, and seems like that has worked. So let's close the terminal. Let's try to re-upload the file here. That works. The file was created within the storage. Let's refresh the table. And as you can see, a new receipt record was created with the correct storage file name. Alright, so I think we're good here. We could clean this up a little bit and move the file upload part somewhere else, like in its own service maybe. But I'm going to leave that for you to do as an exercise if you're up for it. So thank you so much for watching. Pump the likes if you enjoy my videos, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.